narrated by Gilliam, Hornback. Chapter 1. Henry William Tyler. His name was Henry William Tyler. He was a true Southern gentleman in every sense of the word. Born and raised in Mason Creek, Georgia, he was well known and thought of rather highly by everyone who knew him in his small rural community. He had a beautiful wife, daughter, son-in-law, and 2 wonderful grandsons. He had a life that was full of treasures that you could not put a price on. Henry's father was a salesman who could sell a bathing suit to an Eskimo. Folks say that the gift of being a salesman was definitely passed on to Henry. Henry was kind and pleasant, had an impish smile that curved into deep dimples, and bright eyes that danced whenever he would go into one of his long, drawn-out stories. He claimed his stories were all passed down from generation to generation. Most of the people who heard his stories thought that what Henry said must have been true based on how long it took him to tell them. However, most of the folks in Mason Creek didn't seem to mind how long Henry's stories took to tell, as every day they would gather at Henry's hardware store to hear him tell the same stories over and over again. They knew that every story, regardless if they had heard a similar version of it before, was going to be different the next time they heard it. Henry knew how to embellish his tales. He dressed them up much like bright rhinestones on a country western singer's blazer. He caused them to dazzle and sparkle a little more with every telling of them. Whether the story was really that long, or if it was the southern drawl, or perhaps the way Henry turned phrases was questionable. However, again, it didn't much matter, as it was free entertainment in a small town with not much else to do but shoot the breeze. Every day, friends, family, and even a few occasional strangers would gather around the counter at Henry's hardware store when he would begin one of his elaborate tales. They listened in anticipation of being thoroughly entertained, but not before they buried their arms down into a huge barrel full of ice-cold soda pop and bought a greasy brown paper sack of Henry's famous hot-boiled peanuts. They sipped their colas and ate their peanuts while listening to Henry and watching every lively expression. When they left the hardware store, they usually walked away from the experience having bought several hardware items that they really didn't have need of. However, they also left his store with huge smiles on their faces and their heads shaking in disbelief as the stories got a little wilder with the telling. Henry was of a senior age. How senior, I couldn't really tell. But when Henry looked into the mirror, the person looking back at him sure told it all. It seemed strange to Henry, though, because the man he saw in the mirror looked more like his dad than it did himself. What Henry saw was a tall, thin man with white hair and white whiskers. If he had not known better, Henry would have sworn that it was his father. When Henry smiled, he could see slight wrinkles, not quite as deep as the ones he remembered his father having, but wrinkles nonetheless around the corners of his eyes. He also saw his father's forehead and nose, which were strong characteristic traits throughout the Tyler family tree. As Henry continued to gaze at his image in the mirror, he whispered softly to himself, "Yep, with this forehead and this nose, I can be assured that I am indeed a Tyler." "But when did I get to be so darn old?" Henry questioned. "Where did the time fly off to?"